So it's a tough business, but we try to cut dollars at every possible corner that we can.
John, one of the things that budget people in town that look at the budgets may say is our special ed costs are kind of rising higher this year. Mm-hmm. What are some of the inherent issues with special ed so that maybe you can give the voters and citizens in Monroe an idea of the kind of things you all struggle with when you put that budget together?
Well, special ed is a category that is sort of perplexing for districts around the state and quite frankly around the nation. Different students have different needs, and it's our responsibility to meet those needs. Plain and simple. That's the basic formula that we have to apply to it. And we do very well again in Monroe. We probably have about 9 to 10% of our students identified in the area of special ed, and that's versus a statewide figure of about 13%. So our identification rate is lower. Consequently, we have to spend fewer dollars than most school systems do. We try to keep our outplacement costs to a minimum. In other words, there are certain students that have really pressing needs that cannot be met in a district, and we have to place them in a facility outside of the town. And we try whatever way possible to keep those costs to a minimum because, as you could well imagine, they can be very sizable. And we do that well. You know, we probably at any given point have no more than 10 or 12 students outplaced. That's out of a total school population of well over 4,000 students. So we're managing as well as we can, and we're trying to meet the needs of the students right within the confines of our own town here. And our Director of Special Ed Services is really doing an excellent job and is well respected around the region and state.
You know, finally, John, how would you characterize the education budget that the Board of Finance has endorsed and is presenting to the voters on April 1st?
Well, as you mentioned at the outset, Tom, you know, all of the groups who've been involved in the process, starting with the Board of Education, have taken a good hard look at this budget. And believe me, as you said before, there really is no excess or fat in this budget. There are things that we think we could have used, but we're going to have to do without for another year. But the reality of it is it's a good, tight budget. It has been analyzed every which way a budget can be analyzed by the Board of Ed, and then certainly by yourself, the Town Council, and the Board of Finance. So what is going before the voters on April 1st is a good, solid, tight, reasonable budget. It's very competitive, in fact, lower in value than most of the surrounding school districts that we need to compete with. And as I said before, we really have to compete with the best and the brightest in the state in the district reference group that we are located in. And we do a good job. I mean, if you measure the outcome at the end of 13 years in education, we're sending about 90% of our students directly from Massac High School into colleges and universities around the region, and in fact around the entire state and nation. So we're doing very well. I think it's a good proposition for the folks in town. All of our recommendations have been directed at student improvement, at instruction, and what goes on in the classroom. At the same time, we've tried to be as productive and as efficient as we can in managing everything else. That's our bus contracts, our fuel contracts, our all of those services that are essential to run any kind of a large school operation. So it's a good system. It's a very solid system, and the request here is reasonable, and we're certainly hoping that the townspeople can find it in their thought process after they examine all of the numbers to support this budget, both on the education and town side.
And that brings us pretty much to the end, and I just want to talk to the voters of Monroe a little bit on the vote, and I want to just remind you, it's April 1st. The polls are open from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. You vote at your normal polling place. I hope that you exercise your right to vote. I hope you can think positively about supporting this budget. It's a budget that's affordable, meets our needs, and allows the town to move forward. So with that, John, I'd like to thank you for being the first guest on Monroe on the Record. We're looking forward to more shows and more opportunities to let the citizens of Monroe know what's going on in town. So thank you so much. Appreciate it.
I appreciate you inviting me here today. And you know, one last word I might say. I have a sort of a unique and somewhat different perspective as an interim superintendent of schools. I'm only here for a short period of time. while the board is in the process of selecting the next superintendent who will hopefully be with the system for many years to come. But in doing so, I can really look at things objectively, and I've worked quite hard on this budget over the last 2 months since I arrived here. And as I mentioned, I can objectively say that it is a good proposition for the town, that it's well constructed, and that the taxpayers are really getting good value for their dollar. And I don't think they can ask for much more in this day and age, and know that the folks who are running their town and running their school system are doing a good job with the resources that they've been fortunate enough to receive.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.